please.
Allers?
You see Allers?
Yes.
Here.
Deacon?
Here.
Hensley?
Present.
Lester?
Here.
Mealy?
Here.
Schwartz?
Here.
Spencer?
Here.
Spicer? Wiseman?
Present.
Wright.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda, which will take up most of the next couple of meetings, are department presentations. And I believe today we are starting with Public Works and the divisions under Public Works. So, Mr. Marash.
All right, thank you. And Public Works has 10 divisions, all very different, typically, except 3 of them are in actually wastewater though. But, at the last couple Public Works and Planning Committee meetings, we went through kind of what each division does, and in pretty great detail. It took quite a bit of time, so I'm not going to redo that here, but all those presentations are downloadable on your iPad that you can do now. So if you had a question about something in particular, we can certainly answer it, but that's kind of, and it was a backward, kind of back-looking current budget, this is what the budget does, et cetera, et cetera. So I know we had to get through this in a short amount of time as well, so I thought I'd just mention that and put those in the packet. I have basically 4 slides that are hitting some of the bigger issues in Public Works that are budget related, but so I'll just get started here. And I don't think this is in your packet yet. It'll be on the screen, but it will be in your packet for later, so once we get a chance to download it and everything. But basically in Public Works, you know, the 2 biggest topics I see for us coming up this year and the next few years are equipment and personnel. And so I kind of talk about each of those in these next couple slides, but we start with equipment here. If you want to, in your budget, proposed budget, the street and stormwater is kind of the main equipment issue, and there's certainly the replacement is a huge issue, and then just getting the products is a huge issue. But in street and stormwater, it's really one division, but they do both of those things primarily. The pink sheet total is a little over $3.2 million. That's page 215 of the budget. So much of that equipment is still 2005 era, and you know, couple before, a couple after. We had a few new pieces of equipment here and there, but a large chunk of that, well, in the budget, pink sheet total is largely around that 2005 timeframe. So you can imagine 18-year-old equipment, it's rusty, it's out in salt, it's outside, working a lot. The electrical components are issues, mechanical parts availability. We often have to go aftermarket looking for parts, et cetera, et cetera. Now we have good mechanics and keep it all patched together. But once you order one of these large trucks, a lot of times it's a year plus to get it in. So you can kind of see what we're up against there. It's one of those big elephants we've been talking about back when I was new here, pretty new here, 2005, that 2004-05 timeframe. This was a similar issue back then. And the council at that time basically took the fund balance and bought almost all new equipment at that time. And so that's why it's all similarly aged, because that's what happened then. We had a really poor condition of our equipment. We had dump trucks that you couldn't take on a state highway, so we had to park those, things like that. So anyway, now we try to maintain it a little better, and we put a lot of money into it annually, but at some point it's catching up to us and not going to be available when we need it most for snow or ice storms or tornadoes or whatever. So it's also our emergency fleet. So that's primarily the street department. Airport, smaller division, they too have a 05 truck that was purchased back then. That's page 242 in the pink sheets. Now there's other pink sheets in there, but I'm hitting the equipment ones as most important here. Wastewater and parking, so they're enterprise funds, and they generate their own funds, so they can replace their equipment on a regular schedule. And they are in pretty good shape by and large. And there's a lot of pink sheets in the wastewater and parking for equipment, and I think all but one are funded in those 2 divisions of Public Works. Transit, it's kind of a different animal. It mostly is grant funded equipment, and their main issue is the availability, of course. We talk about ordering buses, and then we talk about ordering buses again because we never got the last batch in. And so they have some pretty aged equipment. There's not much we can do about that, obviously, the lag or the availability, but I really, want to impress upon people the need is pretty great for equipment in the streets, and it's kind of that equipment that's really out there in the public's forefront. So is there any questions about any of that? I've got Britt here to help me talk about it. See all the various trucks and equipment there.
Where are we with street sweepers?
Well, we have one in the budget. We ordered one last year, and I just heard last week it's kind of a lemon, so they're coming to pick it back up.
So we have no sweepers.
Well, we have
The street sweeping fleet, we have 3 street sweepers. There's a truck mounted and 2 Pelican style, what they're called Pelican style 3-wheelers. We replaced the oldest Pelican with another, that's the one that the company's coming and bring us another one. We're having issues with it. But the 2 other ones are aged, and we have a pink sheet for one to replace one of those.
The reason I ask is because the ongoing concern I've had with the grass growing between the gutter and the streets and even in the storm inlets, it all comes down. I thought it was spraying, but it's not. It comes down to street sweeping. The street sweepers it would germinate there in the crack, and then it'd be kicked right on out. Same way with the storm inlets. And since we quit sweeping the streets because of the equipment malfunction the last few years, you can see the results. And that vegetation is the worst thing that can happen to our asphalt roads, because once the roots stake, they're not just there, they get way under there. I mean, they go farther than probably the plant does, and it's a conduit for moisture, and that's why we're having a horrible time with some of our roads. So we can put that a priority, get the sweepers on the road, find the parts. We've got to do something. And not only that, it's a horrible impression the city brings when this stuff has already hit climax growth. I mean, it's budding out. I mean, past flower stage, everything's gone to seed, 2-3 foot high in places. So not only is it horrible for our streets, it also is a poor impression. So if we can find some money for the street sweepers, I think we'd be way ahead on it.
And this is probably comes down part of the issue. I know in the budget proposed, there's the 2575 issue, I'll call it, of the excess sales tax. And so that might be a pool, if that's a big enough priority that it could work. Some of that could be replaced in that pool. These are capital items. So I know there's other departments and divisions have priorities and needs as well, but it's pretty important to Public Works, the equipment side of it.
Any other questions or comments at this point?
All right, so that's equipment side. And next is just the personnel side of things. So, we often talk about our vacancies, things like that. And those are important, certainly. So I just did a look here this last week. I said, okay, let's quantify this, and it's even probably worse than I thought. But in Public Works, we have 127 employees, 4 of which are part-time in transit, but so 123 FTEs really, but plus 4 with transit. So our vacancy rate in all of Public Works, I have it broke down there below, but our vacancy rate right today is 10%. We've certainly heard about transit with vacancies and having to cut routes, et cetera, but the other thing we don't talk about is retirement eligible, and that's why we have some vacancy. In fact, we've had a couple things happen just this week in that regard, but I'll just kind of run down and hit the highlights of this. But when you look at retirement eligibles, we have 25% of our workforce in Public Works that are retirement eligible this coming fiscal year, because there's 2 or 3 coming in next year, but most of them are already eligible of the 32, 19 of which are supervisors. So that's a challenge, obviously. I don't, whatever business you're in, if you have a quarter of your workforce that could retire at any time on you, that's certainly a challenge. And then also the supervisors, in that group. So not to minimize what our workers do for us, but our supervisors do direct the work and figure out in all the various divisions of kind of our priority in getting things done. But so just give you a flavor, for example, in admin, that's where I sit and a couple of us, I'm eligible to retire coming up here. So I just kind of broke it down. Engineering, they don't have any vacancies, but they have four folks that are eligible to retire presently. Streets, same thing. 5 eligible. CM, this is kind of one that just happened. We have one leaving in September. So one of our 7 mechanics is leaving. He primarily does a lot of diesel work, heavy equipment work, that kind of thing. Not that they all don't do that, but that's a pretty big hole. And as far as mechanics go, what's coming, all of our folks are essentially trained right down the road here, Osage County and Lynn at State Tech. They've all have degrees from there. So people coming out of there generally already have a job before they've graduated, especially in the mechanic field. So that's a big problem. Our 2 supervisors of that 4 eligible to retire. So you have over half your workforce could retire today, essentially, in CM. And that keeps the whole city running, the fleet running, everything. Airport, we just have one of our employees over there is eligible to retire. There's only 3. Wastewater, wastewater is another niche field that a lot of certifications that you have to maintain to run these things, et cetera, et cetera. So 4 of our supervisors there. So it's kind of one of the least percentage-wise affected, but really very skilled jobs that are hard to. We're willing to train folks, but we have to keep them here to get them trained as well. Transit, again, that Jerry went through with our Public Works and Planning Committee. That is an older workforce by nature. 8 of those folks are already eligible to retire on staff, and so that's a pretty good chunk of those folks. Parking, another one, small division, 7.5. Britt's the half in there. He's the half in here and a half over in streets, but paid. That's where his salary comes from. But we already have 3 vacancies. So we had one person who was an enforcement person, ended up transferring to streets a few months back. Our supervisor there, manager there, just put in her retirement, so she's going to be leaving in October. And then we have another person out on military leave, and I think we have one new person in enforcement, so they're just getting trained. So that's the other thing. When we talk about this, we bring people on. Certainly it's kind of a cycle, and we bring folks on and try to get them trained, but it takes a little bit to get some of these folks trained. And so it's not an immediate gratification, if you will, to get those people right out there working and doing the work of some of these folks. So I don't like to be skies falling and all that, but this is a big issue for us and for the city, and I thought I'd bring it to everyone's attention.
The new person who you have in enforcement coming on, with that person coming on, is there still a vacancy in enforcement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we run 3 people in enforcement and then a manager helps out in that. So we have 1 vacancy. Rosie.
There's one vacant. There's one vacant officer position today.
And the manager's
the
going.
manager is put in their papers for retirement.
Yeah. So then we have 1 person that's been here a while, and then our new person there, and then no manager. But that could change.
Aside from the notice of retirement and the new person coming on, there's also a staff vacancy in enforcement.
Correct.
Okay.
Maintenance, I believe.
Right.
So we have 2 maintenance people there too.
Well, there's
On
one maintenance that's on military orders.
Oh, yeah.
One maintenance is on military orders through the fall, and 1 truly vacant spot. No one is in. The person who transferred to the street department, that position still remains vacant. Have been conducting interviews, but haven't been too successful yet.
And that 1 truly vacant position is in enforcement.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the other, there's 3 there. 1, we have an experienced officer. 1 that's still in the probationary period, and 1 vacant.
Thank you.
So, we have 32 this coming year retirement eligible. How many last year?
Well, not that they're not taking retirement. So when I looked at that, I said, okay, there's like 3 or 4 people eligible in January, February timeframe. So I just included them because that's the budget we're talking about. The majority of the 32, like 28 or so, are already eligible to retire. Not that they'll retire this year, but they could. And that's a big, so that kind of shows the graying of our workforce. And I think it's a national problem, not just our problem. But the next slide, you know, I just threw out, hey, I don't want to point out a bunch of big problems without some, you know, maybe potential solutions. So
do you know what the status last year was of eligible retirees?
well, there was at least 28, but we probably had some retire. So it was similar. You know, some of them started to be eligible. But when you look at some of those CM, parking especially, those are some small groups, but have a lot of eligibility or vacancy in them. So that just means the work isn't getting done the same. Sure. Now, you know, one thing when I talk to folks, you know, certainly competitive pay and benefits, everybody knows about that. Certainly the state has been pretty aggressive, and they're our big competitor in town. When I look at, you know, various jobs there that we have and they have, it used to be kind of flip-flopped. I always thought, well, we could always come and get a person. If we had a vacancy, we would kind of look in the state where that job kind of resides, whether it's in streets, so we go to MoDOT, or engineering, we go to DNR and MoDOT and various other places and look and say, oh, we could usually attract somebody over. It's kind of flipping on us now that they are leading the way. One solution in that, certainly in the budget, there's some pay provisions and things like that, which obviously helps. But, you know, I feel like having some more streamlined kind of an annual process discussion in this budget more than we do. We've had these evergreen studies, you know, and various studies in the past. They take so long to do. You know, if we want to look at a position to change or modify, you know, going through somebody like that takes a long time. And I know other places have internal ways they do that. I'm not proposing the exact solution, but I think if we could start thinking in those terms, maybe our new city administrator or somebody could come up with something here. But you know, just talking about it and having that annual process, I think it would help the staff feel better about their jobs here. So that's kind of a thing I wish we could do. I don't know exactly all the ins and outs of it. I'm sure HR could help with that, but just thinking outside the box a little bit. And I know private companies do something similar sometimes as well. So, and then just bringing in younger workforce. So I don't feel all that old, but apparently I am. So, you know, it seems the younger people have different expectations than maybe even my age folks. But, you know, flexibility is a big thing for folks nowadays. Time off, which is actually in the budget proposal, some better time off. That's back to those benefits. I was really mentioning healthcare above. Some of that time off rule, you know, my wife works for a pretty large company, and they do some of this, and they when they meet with their younger workforce, you know, or just their employees, the younger ones always bring up the time off. She said, you know, she comments to me, well, I'm out of time off, and they don't have any kids or not married, but they, you know, they got their things they want to do, and so, but that's kind of an attitude of a younger workforce, I think, where, you know, we had these 30, 40-year employees in some cases, and it just didn't seem to come up, you know, like it does with our younger workforce. And then that kind of dovetails into the career path ladder thing discussion. Certainly we have some one-offs through evergreen studies and things like that, but really I think we got to do a better job of that. I think you know, that's another thing that young folks bring up. Hey, I got to wait for this guy to retire, you know, before I can move up. And so if that's what our workforce is saying, you know, we actually went through a process a couple of years ago, I think it was, where we said, okay, and proposed it to the city administrator at the time. It didn't go anywhere, but we had a kind of a career path for various positions, especially like wastewater comes to mind, and streets for kind of our workforce, where if you got these certifications, you know, you might get a 5% adjustment or something in your pay. The wastewater is a really good example. You got to have a lot of state certifications to run a wastewater plant. So if you're an A operator, you know, that's the highest level. maybe our job only requires the C, but if you go ahead and get your B or A even, you know, you keep moving up instead of go get another job at another wastewater place or the water company or somebody else. And so having those in our pocket to help with that, I think would be a good, you know, another potential solution to help with our workforce issues. But anyway, I just, you know, quickly jotted some things down there to think about. It's not, some of them are in the budget, but others I think can certainly be things we work on over the next year, or I would propose we work on over the next year.
Councilman Schwartz.
How many part-time young men and women do we employ during the summer?
Primarily in streets, we have some, we'll go back to FTEs here, but in streets, wastewater, we typically would hire some high school and sometimes college. I think we have one college age person working with us in streets and GIS this summer. We used to do a little bit more of that in engineering, but they're really hard to come by even when they're available, even the high school kids lately. So Britt, you want to add anything?
Right, streets used to put on as many as 8 in the summer. Now we're lucky to get 2 or 3. It's not that we don't have the funds in the budget to hire them. They're not applying for the jobs.
We're still advertising for the 8. We're just not getting them.
We're just not getting them. Parking would put on a couple. Streets would put on, like I said, up to 8. I think wastewater.
Eric wasn't available here.
Wasn't available, but they would put on 4, 5, or 6. But again, we're just not getting the applications. We're competing with McDonald's paying $14, $15 an hour. We're closer to minimum wage. But if we get them too high, we're paying them more than some of our full-time employees by the hour. So.
Just reading from the news thing we have about the latest job fair we had, where it wasn't as well attended, or people have showed up interest in this. Do you have discussions with Mr. McGraw and I would think Lincoln and Mr. Mosley and maybe Lynn State and seeing where they see the kids coming in, what their desired goals or where they want to go at, and and kind of get a feel for what the kids are looking at to when they get out of high school. Just kind of say, hey, they're not really concentrating too much in the diesel mechanics or, maybe just a regular job starting out in wastewater or streets or something like that. Do we have an idea where the younger workforce is looking at from discussions with everybody?
I don't know. I'll kick that to maybe Gail or somebody, but I know, just in our area alone, State Tech, they're rapidly growing, and a lot of the people on our workforce have degrees from there. Our construction inspectors are all degreed from State Tech. They're older, so it wasn't called State Tech back then, but several of our wastewater people, I think some streets folks, that is a good place. All of our mechanics are State Tech degree. It's just that those people are in such high demand, even though they're rapidly growing. But I think we have a competitive advantage trying to get those folks if we can get the salaries to work out. But they're all being hired just quickly, and private companies, whoever. It's just that we've had trouble getting them to come to work here. But because of our location, many of them are from the area and probably want to stay. So I think that's our advantage.
I want to say 96% have already been contacted and have something lined out. I mean, so it's very,
very competitive, and it's a tough environment. It's not just the city; it's a lot of others. But we're talking about the city right now. So, but yeah. So I mean, when I look at that, that's tough situation. So I attended some conferences recently, and we talked about workforce a lot, and a lot of factories. That's why you hear about automation. That's kind of an answer to help with their workforce issues. Some of ours aren't akin to that. If you've got to fix a pipe in the ground, you got to pretty well get in the ground and fix the pipe, dig the pipe up, and haul the material away in a truck, or you got to have a mechanic to fix the other trucks. even new trucks have problems. So anyway, just these are the things. If you ask me when we have something come up, snow or some natural disaster, I always think about in the back of my head, oh gosh, what's our equipment doing? Where are the mechanics at on all that? So making sure we can actually respond. So anyway, but there's many other parts to the budget. Like I said, we discussed a lot of that at Public Works and Planning Committee, and be happy to go over anything else, but that's all I really had for today.
Any other questions, comments from the committee to Public Works? Matt, one thing I will mention, I asked Britt and your staff to sort of look at the number of tickets written.
Oh, yes, sir.
Primarily at the, I was most interested, of course, in the unmetered time zones downtown. And really just looking at the period from the middle of May when we adjusted the downtown parking ordinance to, I think, the end of July. Just that period, and then the 3 years prior just for that same period. And we don't need to get into all the specifics, but just from 2022 to 2022, that period, to this year, during that period, down over half the number of tickets written for that reason. And 2021, and 2020, those are both actually significantly higher even than 2022. And for that period, just at the High Street in Madison, the overtime parking tickets, 2020 it was like 434, 21 it was 394, and then it went down in 2022 to 273 tickets written for that reason during that period. But then May 15th to July 31st this year, after we made that change, it was down to 131 from 273 the year before. And then you also gave some data on just all tickets written, and I wasn't quite sure exactly what everything that would have, is that, staying over at a meter, is that parking somewhere, you're just, any parking ticket was also way down. And I asked about the vacant enforcement position earlier, so I guess if that spot is ever filled and we have another person back out there, another person enforcing, I guess we'll see what impact that vacancy had on this. But all we can see at this point is from July 15th when we made that change to the end, May 15th when we made that change to the end of July, tickets more than cut in half for overtime parking on Madison and High Streets downtown as compared to last year, and even farther down compared to prior years. So I appreciate the data, and let's just keep an eye on that.
Yeah, and so just so you all know, two things that's reflected in the budget that we put out is that we backed off the revenue because that is 1/10 of our revenue, just tickets in the revenue side of parking. So we backed that down because we could see that happening when we put the budget together. I don't know if we backed it down enough to even compensate for once we actually took the detailed look that you asked for. Two reasons I would say. One is the vacancy, certainly. When you have a vacant position, 1 out of 3, and then a new person, so it's really kind of almost 2 out of 3. That affects it a lot to get that person trained. So, and then just the walking exercise that is done, we do that, but it is time consuming. So that person used to drive that pretty quickly and then go elsewhere to look for violations. So those other violations are down probably just because they don't get there as much, is the issue.
I suspect this is information that the council is going to continue to be interested in. So I think it would probably be a good idea to continue tracking this, at least just on your own. On a
Brent and staff
basis or something like that. Yeah. Any questions, comments for Public Works? Any of the divisions? Anything good? Great, thank you. Is there any other department that's queued up for today for presentation?
A couple things if I could, Chairman. I'll follow up on some things that were brought up here. In your big budget book, just for reference, the multi-page document. So once 197 is where Public Works starts, and they run all the way through like 290. But some things that were brought up specifically when we talk about the big sheet request. If you go to page 375, talk about a couple things in there. I'll give you a little time to kind of get there. I know it's kind of, you're like me, it takes a little time to navigate that. But it's the big document that you're used to seeing. It's usually printed on large format paper, and it's the 4 sections of different additional budget requests. And so a couple things I'll bring out there to your attention. 375, I think.
375, yeah.
375.
Yeah, the big 375. So some things that were brought up in this conversation. One was the street sweeper there, and you'll see that as a line item there. It's section 3, and it looks like they've estimated that cost at around $300,000. That was not one of my recommendations for immediate, because it really would have exceeded pretty much the entire immediate amount that we talked about in that allocation of 2575, but certainly would be something that could be considered in the long term, or the more ongoing type of strategic, type of purchase. So just want to make sure that everybody's tracking there. Do I need to slow down? Is everybody on page 375? Does everybody see the street sweeper there as a unfunded item? Okay. So that's one thing there. And then the other thing I was going to mention, just because it was kind of brought up, is we kind of talked a little bit or danced around the idea of an internship program. That is also something that HR put in their pink sheet request. You can see that there at the cost of $20,800 in section 2. A little bit different than the part-time work, but I think we were kind of talking about, what are some strategies. Councilman Allers, you kind of mentioned that, so I'll put that in there too. Again, that was not recommended just because of all the other priorities. Certainly, it's a valid program, and I know we probably have people in the room that were part of that internship program at one time or another. So, and then the final one that I would like to talk about is one that was mentioned both in the letter on page 3, section 8, but it's on the screen too, and it's something that Director Marash mentioned in his benefits package, as far as what can we do, what is something that we can do that is valued both by potential employees from a recruitment standpoint, but also from a retention standpoint to try to keep the employees that we've already got. And so in that section, I believe it is section 8, it kind of spills over from page 3 to page 4. It talks about a proposed benefit enhancement that impacts both vacation and sick leave. And so I'll call your attention to what's on the screen, but it is also in your letter. And then we'll talk just a little bit about that. It also corresponds to pink sheet request on page 65 of the big document. So it also crosses over into that as well for a little bit more description and justification. So what this is a proposal that would increase the accrual for vacation and then also the cap for vacation. And there's a couple different things I would just bring to your attention. One of them is that historically, if you look at what the current situation is versus what's proposed there, I want to highlight the years 15 through 20 and 21 through 24. So historically, for unknown reasons, but as far as we can remember, it has always been you hit this 15-year mark, and then you were stagnant. You hit essentially a brick wall. You never increased your accrual, and I don't know the history. It's been that way as long as we can remember, but
we had discussions with that back in 1997.
So at least 1997 or longer, but this does propose a way to have a incremental increase throughout those years. And so what you can see here is it does increase the accrual rate for vacation, and then it also allows for a little bit of a higher max. So we felt like that was kind of something that employees have brought up over many years as something they'd like to see some movement on. It certainly was identified in the Austin Peters study as something we could do and probably should do to remain competitive. It's reflected, I think, in what Director Marash presented to the group as far as time off and flexibility within work schedules. We feel like it's a pretty important thing. Is there a cost to it? Is probably your question. And of course, we know the answer is yes, there is a cost. But one of the conversations we had as department directors is can we attempt to try to manage that within our department? And the answer that we got from all the department directors was we thought it was important enough to provide that benefit for the employees that we thought it was worth that. And that may mean, some challenges for the department director and also the future city administrator to manage within their work area. But we felt like it was an important thing to offer to the employees. It also is, the reason we're talking about it now is it does, from a proportional basis, compare to what was approved in the IAFF CBA contract that was recently approved. So we all know that shifts are different for firefighters. The whole idea of a 40-hour work week versus a 56. And so obviously their numbers are different, but proportionally this would be the same in terms of that ratio of hours worked versus leave time gained. So that's the other reason that we're talking about it now. And I think it's something that would be a benefit. There is, like I said, a cost estimate broken out in the actual pink sheet request. And again, that's page 65. I think that translates to 65 in the actual document. It says page 65 at the bottom. And so there are some amounts that if we looked historically what it might cost in the breakout of general fund, parks, public safety, wastewater, and transit. But we feel like those are manageable. The other thing that it would also impact is sick leave accrual. So when we talk about sick leave accrual for full-time and part-time staff, this is the same story. We did not propose a change to the cap in sick leave accrual, but we are the total amount that you could accrue, but just the rate at which it's also accrued. So we thought this would be a good time to bring this up, and that's the reason it's highlighted in the letter with the graphic as supported. But we also just wanted to make sure that we gave you an opportunity to ask questions and maybe fully understand what's being proposed.
I think you can't just look at one side of it for vacation if you don't look at it from the sick leave side of it too, especially since we do have an older workforce. Sick leave is a major component with an older workforce. So I think I appreciate from both perspectives, not just one or the other. And obviously there is a potential cost. When that employee separates service, we have basically that buyout portion of it. What would it look like if instead of having the buyout portion of it, that employees could use their sick time, their vacation time, to purchase time for their loggers buyout so that they could retire earlier instead of using the buyback provision?
That's a question. I haven't looked into that. Yeah,
I'd be interested in kind of knowing.
We can certainly ask loggers and kind of see what that might look like from their perspective. So just so I'm clear, we want us to investigate and bring back to the committee maybe if that's possible and then what it might look like if it were. Okay.
That's what I was.
Just clarification for Councilman Spencer. We're looking at if these hours accumulated up, what our cost would be compared to if, let's say, the loggers say, well, that takes off a year of theirs, and that basically is still time up that they met their time, they can maybe leave a year earlier, is what you're looking at, right? And that's what the answers you were looking for. Okay, thank you.
And there is an offset in that too, because obviously you're leaving a year earlier. You're not maxing out your potential for raises or enhancements for that next year. So again, I'd just be interested in knowing the possibility of that.
Yeah, we can definitely ask.
Councilman Schwartz, then Councilman Mealy.
Yeah, I got two questions. You said that departments or divisions can pay for this out of their current allocations, but do we have an estimated cost of implementing this? Because we talked last week about the health insurance, and I stand by my statement from last week that I think most employees would rather have money in their pocket than an increase in benefits. And so I'm not openly saying I'm opposed to this, but I think people would rather have a bigger raise than more vacation. So I'll just stick with that. But I've talked to Sheila before about implementing, or at least doing a study on an implementation of a PTO program versus the separation of vacation and sick leave. I think, of course, in those discussions, we talked about new employees not transferring the entire staff over to that, but just implement it on an ongoing basis. But I think that allows a lot more flexibility for people that have a benefit package versus having to maybe call in with a headache when they want to do something fun. So, plus I think that flexibility allows the city to maybe shorten the accruals a little bit and save us money, because flexibility and a little less time, I think, would be a bonus for both things. So that's more of a statement, but I think we should look into it. But as far as the new accruals go, there's got to be significant cost to that, I think, especially as Ms. Marash said, with 28 people or 32 people for retirement now who probably have significant accruals already. So yeah, I don't really need an answer. I just kind of want to say that.
Councilman Mealy.
Sick leave being used to supplement to meet a retirement age or date is something that our biggest competitor does. I mean, that's been around. So matching that might be something that would benefit the city. What on the annual leave matches our biggest competitor pretty well now, the proposed annual leave. The full-time staff proposed sick leave accrual is substantially higher than, say, 1 to 5 year employees who are our biggest competitors. So I guess my question would be is, what was important about the number 8 going from 10 hours to 18 hours?
So you're talking about sick leave accrual?
Right.
Yeah, I'll let Director Strope address that if she'd like. I know that was a big conversation.
Thank you. So our sick leave program is our short-term disability. We don't provide a separate outside short-term disability policy for our employees. So it is based solely on sick leave. Currently, because sick leave, you start on day 1 without any sick leave available, right? And you accrue it. We have a problem with new employees that come in, and it takes a long time for them to go that time. So, for example, if you have a person who's looking to come to work with us and maybe they're planning to start a family soon, and they're concerned that, well, if I go there, I'm not going to have accrued leave to be able to take off when you things like that. So that was the goal in looking at trying to increase the sick leave time.
So for your example, do we offer maternity and paternity leave, or is that built into those 18 hours?
It's built into those hours.
Wow. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
But I'm glad you brought up the point of trying to match our largest competitor. We're saying what we're not saying, which is the state, right? And so that has been the driving force behind a lot of these numbers, and this justification is we are being shopped by the same employee pool. There's no question about that. And so we feel like we at least need to match that. And if we're behind, it's going to be easily identified. It's going to be more difficult to not only recruit but also retain.
Councilman Spencer.
Just to follow up and make sure I was on the same page with Councilman Schwartz. Are you maybe looking at having 2 groups of employees with paid benefits and another group that opts out of certain or all benefits for an increased hourly rate?
No,
Okay,
no.
that's what I, okay. And the reason why I ask that is that, you know, we're consistently hearing younger workforce, maybe their priorities are totally different than what mine were when I came on the fire department. I mean, I love knowing that I was going to have a pension, you know, and maybe, you know, the younger workforce, that's not a high priority for them. I don't know. So, I mean, I think that's where a lot of the questions have to be answered is, you know, what is the current younger workforce? What do they prioritize? Is it just money? Is it just the hourly rate? Do they not care about those benefits that there is a substantial cost for the city to offer to its employees? So, you know, and that's, I was hoping maybe that was going to be captured by some of the information with the two previous salary studies that we had, and
Well, and
there's a little light in that.
I asked the same question a few days ago. I said, you know, did we actually look at benefits as part of Evergreen? And the answer is no. It was just compensation. And so it really didn't take into account bringing us up to speed on benefits, benefit packages, and how we compare to our peers. Austin Peters did, and it identified, you know, these things as some of the things that we could do. And I guess the way we looked at it as department directors was, you know, yes, there is a cost. We can look back and kind of see what some of those costs would have been. But we also know there is intangible benefit, and there's tangible cost and intangible cost, and the same is true for benefit. There's tangible and intangible. We felt like this was a way to get a large bang for our buck as an employer, because within that amount of money that a department is given to manage their workforce and personnel services, you know, there are some strategies that can be employed to say, okay, that's the amount, we're going to try to live within those means. And it kind of goes back to some other conversations that I think we'll get into as we go through this process. You know, when you have people that are loyal and that are sticking with you, and you have a lot of the vacancies like what are described, and maybe even people working additional overtime, right? You know, we had a lot of conversations in this leading up to this budget presentations where we talked with departments who said, I need more overtime. And we said, yeah, well, you're spending more on overtime. There's no doubt about that. And part of the reason you're spending more on overtime is because you're short positions, right? And so the question always comes up, well, you don't want to give up the position because we are still optimistic and hopeful that someday they'll be able to fill those positions. And it kind of ebbs and flows, you know. Sometimes we do really well, and sometimes we go through a stretch where we're not able to fill those positions. But the personnel money that goes from those we'll call it vacancy savings. I don't like that term, but that's probably the best term that we can use. Then gets shifted into those overtime salaries to cover that, a portion of it, maybe not all of it, depending on how much, you know, the people that are backfilling are making. But you'll see that theme. You would see that theme repeated in different departments around the city. You might see that in transit. You might see that in PD. You might see it in streets or some of the other different departments that you have to fill positions and people have to be in those spots doing that work. So I guess I kind of make a comparison too for the benefits. You know, if we can provide a little bit better benefits in some cases to the employees that are sticking around, and they feel supported, I do think that makes a big difference in terms of morale. And maybe if someone was on the fence as to whether or not they wanted to leave and go to a competitor, we might be able to hold on to them, and then might also be able to recruit a little bit better as well. So it is a complex issue, and we're not saying there isn't a cost. What we're saying is we believe that it can be managed, especially when we're in a time where we have some vacancies in a lot of those areas.
I guess I also still don't understand why, you know, if we go through a very good vetting process for any position that's open, how come we can't have, from day one, they have a minimum accrual rate from the get-go? You know, I'm not saying to the 1 year or 5 year person, but where maybe that would ease a concern they would have, that, they would have some sick leave or some vacation time, that they wouldn't have to wait until their anniversary date. There's a lot of, I mean, yeah, COVID, I mean, that whole complexity of sick leave, those kinds of things, so. Just
and it's kind of what he was saying, just so I want to explain, we have a lot of movement around in all of our divisions, but so when somebody does separate, some people will accrue to the maximum they can on vacation sick so they get a payout. Or some people don't. They use their vacation time as it comes up because they like taking vacations as they're here. And so, just for example, when one of our older long-term staff members quit in Public Works downstairs, Brenda Wonderlick, for example, she'd been here many, many years, close to 40, I think. Mm-hmm. And she had quite a bit of time built up, and she made a certain wage because of her tenure. And so when she retired, we had to do some payouts, and so, but it was certainly manageable. So it wasn't a new number we had to come up with from somewhere. It just, because she was paid, her budget is based on the whole year long. So if she quits mid-year, we pay that out. It's a couple months of pay, or I don't even know what it was. So as we replace, we advertise, it takes some time to do all that. And so we paid out of that lump sum. So as a department director, I have to look at that and say, okay, we're bringing the new person in, different rate typically, usually lower because they haven't been here as long, things like that. So all of that is adjusted, and that's how we manage through it, just so everybody's, if you have a good, clear example of that. But we just look at that and just the time lag and the different rates. Usually and then if we promote from within, typically, if we try to every time, if we can, make that available to in-house people, then that person's position is open. And so it's just kind of a domino. And so that's when we say managing through it. I'm over 20 years, I've never had a problem with that issue. It's really never a problem. There is a cost if you want to look at it as a dollar and cents, but that position in your budget's vacant or another one is, and we just work through it as we go. So that's an example.
We have a few minutes left of our scheduled time today. Were there any other comments from staff?
I was just going to mention there will be one other piece to this conversation coming up in the HR presentation about an item that we considered as part of this discussion on payout, but we can do that today or we can do that then. It's up to the chairman.
It's probably not sufficient time. We have about 8 minutes left, so we can hold that. Is there anyone here to make public comment today? That's an item on the agenda. Seeing none, thank you. Anything else at all aside from that HRPC? That's probably a long conversation. I don't feel compressed. Well, we have a few minutes now for committee discussion on the budget conversation so far. Any general or specific comments or questions from the committee?
It's just a comment. I could just, from stuff where I was previously employed with the same issue. New people coming on, maybe have kids or something, they get sick leave right off the bat. Something we had to look at as far as really bringing people on too. So, Scott's comments also that that's a big thing when you hire some, I have this right now issue coming up, but I know I don't have that time off. We can use it right off the bat if they knew something's come up in a month. So I know that's a big thing on hiring, how all that's transpires. So, and it's what the younger kids are looking for, just by having a couple kids. So it's something I know is important on our hiring practices.
So just to clarify, city employees who start accruing on day one. So you would start accruing vacation and sick time on day one. It accumulates every pay cycle. The stipulation is that the vacation time has a grace period, which is the same as your probationary period, but sick leave does not. So sick leave is starting to accrue on day one and you're eligible to use it on day one, but practice has not been to allow them to go into the hole, so to speak, unless there's some kind of prior agreement, I think, with the department director.
How much leeway is afforded to you, just being nuanced, how much each director afforded that flexibility in their scheduling? Or, okay, you can do this or that.
I feel like most directors would be flexible with things like that. I know we have a situation right now in administration, and we have made some other accommodations for flexing time to allow maybe a shortened lunch hour, coming in early, that kind of thing. So I think department directors try and be as flexible as possible, but I just want to clarify, you do start to accumulate on day one. You can use sick time from day one, but you do have that waiting period for vacation.
Thank you.
Councilman Schwartz.
Does the city currently have anybody working from home? Is that allowable? Is something we allow across the entire spectrum?
I really think that's a department by department kind of decision. At this point, I'm not aware of anyone that works from home regularly. I don't know that it's necessarily uncommon for a day here in some instances.
I think it would have to be, well, I know it would be approved by the department director or supervisor, and it would definitely be the exception. There's no one who, I think your question is, has someone decided to just work from home indefinitely? And I can't think of any situation.
I guess my question was, does the city have a policy after COVID that allows for that on a regular basis?
I'm not
It
aware.
would be a case-by-case review.
And then the city administrator's final authority though too. It would fall under the city administrator's final authority.
I think that would always be the case,
Well,
yes.
And I think that the concern is we have very few jobs that could be done remote.
Ms. Stroh.
One thing I just wanted to add on to what Ms. Perry said, on the vacation, she said you wait on vacation. I just wanted to clarify that's 6 months. In case anybody was curious what that time period was.
Probationary period.
Yeah, well, there are some different introductory periods. Majority of employees are 6 months, some are a year though. So, but for everybody, they can start using their vacation time at 6 months. And then sometimes it is worked out with employees in advance, like new hires, so things like, hey, I've got this vacation plan with my family in 2 months, is that gonna be a problem? And it's very common for us to say, no, that's not a problem, but you're typically gonna be willing to pay for that period of time. They may have been able to accrue a little bit of comp time or something like that, but very rarely is that much time for a vacation, so.
Thank you very much. Our next meeting will be this Thursday, August 17th at noon. Which departments should we prepare to hear from?
We will have planning and protective services, and we will have administrative departments, as well as some of the other funds that we would typically talk about, like sales tax and some of the special revenue funds.
There you go. Any final comments, questions? Seeing none, we are adjourned and we'll see you on Thursday. Thank you all very much.
Oh, there it goes.